Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of a Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs.
Welcome everyone to the podcast. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. It's all about helping you develop as a professional, where you make the choices that affect you in your classroom for the betterment of your students. And so far, Sharon, we've got over 2,700 downloads from teachers all over the world.
I know.
Which is fabulous.
It amazes, well...
Mostly from Australia, but all over. Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't say it amazes me, but it is really exciting to be getting so many people tuning in. And as we say, you know, some people are interacting with us, and we love that too. And
we've just started a Teachers Toolkit Facebook group, which we'd love you to join and welcome any newcomers. We've already got 350 members of that, so that's great. But today's one of those days where we have a special guest on, and we welcome Alison Marsh, a teacher at Harndorf Primary School. And when we have our guests on, they usually illustrate something that we've been talking about, but it's about writing today, Sharon.
Yes, and it's always fantastic to have somebody who's right there in the classroom all the time coming to share how it worked, what they did. So welcome, Alison.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Love that you're here to join us. And we've actually mentioned you before on our podcast.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Okay.
So you haven't been listening, have you?
Doesn't matter.
No. It has been mentioned because this work that, you know, the writing that you started doing through literature with your children has just been so exciting. It's been great because I've had the absolute privilege of hearing you talking about that at the Be Brave and Lead sessions. So today's session...
But Sharon, we'll just back up a little bit before we do that, because
jumping the gun.
We're going to just have a little bit of a theme here of how we look after ourselves as teachers.
Oh,
and
nice.
I would say during the holidays I've done things that have tried to recharge my batteries, like watching cricket and trying out cooking and all those sort of things. What about Sharon? What sort of things do you like to do during the holidays to recharge yourself?
Well, actually, reading for me is always a good recharge. So reading sometimes for just personal growth. Did read a few. I've received some very nice recipe books of late. So the cooking theme is there. So I've been able to read that wonderful book, Pawana, which is a fabulous story of a Afghan restaurant here in South Australia. So I've thoroughly enjoyed reading that, but I have also enjoyed having some more time to read a whole stack of some of the latest children's novels. So I'm a bit excited actually, thinking that I'll be able to share a lot of that over the coming weeks of those new books. And I can see a smile on your face with that, Alison, because of course Alison, you're a Year 6 teacher, so or going in with Year 7s this year. So I might have some new books to recommend.
Great.
Yes.
Love to hear it.
Yeah.
And what sort of things have you done to recharge, Alison?
I'm a bit guilty of Netflix.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Because I don't get time any other time, so I just sit and I watch Netflix.
Have you seen Bridgerton?
No, I've heard lots about it.
You've got to see that. It's great.
I've been watching Your Honour. I like Your Honour.
No, I haven't.
Bryan Cranston in it. I watched that one.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
There's a recommendation for me.
Is that a series?
Yes.
Yep.
That's a really good series, yes. Yes. A bit crime related, and that's what I like. So
Yes.
it's all the crime stuff. So Netflix watching all the crime documentaries and
Yeah, it's great having days where you can just catch up on a series and just see it over a few days or whatever. That you
and not have to think much for a change.
No.
Just let it, you just sit back and just let it
absorb.
Absorb it, yeah.
Be in
Yeah,
it.
yes.
Yeah.
Without having to deliver.
And one thing I guess people do during holidays is listen to great podcasts, including this one.
Actually, since it has been the holidays, I think a lot of people have actually been listening because we've definitely had lots more people engage with the podcast. So, yes, I think you might be right.
Yeah.
I have also had time to listen to podcasts, so
And Alison,
it's
what
been very nurturing.
going back up a bit, what got you into teaching? You know, what's the thing that...
I remember being in year 2 and I had a teacher, Mrs. Simpfendorfer, and we had a session where we had to say what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I said, I want to be a teacher. And we wrote the little note, I want to be a teacher. And all through my primary and high school years, I did work experience in primary schools. I did all of that sort of stuff. But for some reason, in my very last year of high school, I suddenly went, I'm going to do law instead. So I applied for a Bachelor of Arts,
Yes.
but still a little bit towards children. I picked children's literature as my major, so I did a major in children's literature and just stuck with it. Finished, thought I've had enough of study, I'll go out and work. So I went out and worked in a bank.
Right.
Which is quite the personality killer, I must say, working in a bank. It doesn't inspire a lot of... I'm sorry if people listening work in banks or have partners that work in banks, but
That's
it is, you know. And I just decided at age 28, I thought, no, before I'm 30, I really wanted to teach. It was what I always wanted to do. I'm going back and I'm going to do it. So I went back and did an 18-month postgrad course
Yes.
to get my teaching degree, and that was 18 years ago. And I haven't looked back since. It's the longest I've been in any sort of profession. So, yes. So I'm glad I did it.
Yes, and so are we. So
Oh,
is the profession. It's wonderful. We love what you do. So it's great that you are part of
And it
this
actually meant I was followed by my
fabulous-
brother. So my brother, watching me teach, he went in and did teaching. So he did teaching. And now my husband has suddenly decided he's done SSO work and worked with me. And now he's thought, he's just applied now to go back and do a teaching degree because he wants to do it as well now that he's seen it.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a great profession.
And
isn't
also
it?
you must have, you went to study literature. Was there something that early on in your life that said, I want to get more into learning about literature? Or?
I think it was because having an auntie who was a school principal, she used to constantly supply us with books. I remember my mum every night without fail reading to us. So she would have the 3 younger ones, my sister and my brother, around her, and she would read to us. And I specifically remember Cat in the Hat being read over and over and over because that was the book we wanted to have. And I think it was just because we'd always had books read to us, and I'd always particularly picture books. I had an interest in picture books and illustrators that I just thought, I'm going to do that. And see, because I didn't know how you could do it in uni. I thought, how do you do a degree with children's literature?
Yes.
So I went in and thought, well, I'll see how it goes. Yeah,
And
Fantastic.
how influential that's been.
it was.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we'll go on to our topic now today, which is the art
Well, it leads very nicely, doesn't it?
of teaching writing through literature,
Yes.
which is... Tell us more, Sharon, how that's going to go.
Well, hopefully I get it in the right order here, Phil, because I do jump the gun. So I love that you've already talked, Alison, about how literature was such an important part of your life.
Yes.
And Frank Smith, who I'm going to reference, and he is one of the literacy greats, who just in December we lost.
Sadly.
Yes.
Great man.
So Canadian, but if you want to be inspired around good sense literacy teaching, chase up anything that's been written by Frank Smith. But he talks about literature being a huge factor in the art of teaching writing through literature, because he developed two phrases. One was, we learn from the company we keep.
I've got that stuck up in my classroom.
Oh, look at that. Look at that.
Great.
And so the power of that. And then he also talked about that it was critical. Sometimes we just need to read like a reader, but to be a writer, we need to read like a writer.
Yeah.
So those two principles are really fundamental to what we're talking about today. And you can already hear Alison say, yes, and not only is it in my classroom,
Yes. Yep.
it's how she has come to teach with writing, but it isn't how Alison has always taught writing.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
In fact, it's quite a recent change
It is.
that Alison has made. So the reason that we've brought Alison in today is for her to really, because it is such a recent change, I think it's a really powerful opportunity for us to hear why she made that change after teaching writing not through literature for, let's say, 17 and a half years.
Yes.
And so through discussion with Alison today, we're really going to explore like the steps that she took to make that change. And in fact, I think Alison will agree that it wasn't actually a painful change.
No.
It was actually quite a joyful
Yes, it was. Yeah.
change. So lots of us will be thinking, well, how do I teach? What is the art of teaching through literature, writing through literature? And so that's the conversation we're going to have with Alison today. There's three things that I will just preface before we move on, that I tend to talk about the art of teaching writing through literature as 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is it's all about read alouds. Chapter 2, it's all about reading like a writer. And chapter 3 is being a writer. So keep those in mind as we talked with Alison about, first of all, making this change. So how were you teaching writing? Could you say what it looked like?
Well, yeah, I could probably mention some books that many teachers would recognise, things like Targeting Text. It was whatever the program was at the time. So the school you would go into, there would be a program that they would use, and you would run with that program.
Yep.
And as far as having texts involved, they're involved but in a very different way. So it would be, I need to teach children how to write with apostrophes. Mm-hmm. Now I've got to go and find a book or a passage from a book or something that will help me to teach that. Yes. So I was looking for the teaching point, then looking for the literature to go with it. Yes. I guess is the best way to say it. Yes.
That's a very and sometimes the programs even offered us.
They had the little list
the
at the
example,
end.
didn't they?
Look for these. And if you couldn't find them in the library, you're in panic mode. So here's the 6 that should work. We don't have any of those 6. What do I do now?
Yes. As if that whatever it was only ever appeared in those books.
That's right.
You know, it's and that is part of the shift, isn't it?
Yes.
That rather than saying, okay, I have to find the connections to literature for what I want to teach now, and sort of dismembering literature in that sense or not even connecting it, it was really.
And I think the problem with the books too is it's assuming that every person in front of you, every young mind in front of you will all learn it that same way. So if they all get that same template, they'll all understand it, they'll all run with it that way. And I think that's where the problems came up, because it just doesn't happen that way.
So you didn't see that happening?
You would get that middle range of kids who you always get that pick up. It doesn't matter how you present it to them. They will pick it up. They will run with it. But in some ways, they run in what you expect of them. So you know it's not them, They're giving you what they think they should be giving you. So you'd get that little middle group that was successful, but then you'd have the ones that were struggling, disengaged, and it was, how do I get these people to work? Because it doesn't answer it in this book.
Yes.
It's not working for them. What do we do now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was stifling more than anything else for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think this way or don't bother.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And that there is just one way.
Yes. Yeah.
And once you know the one way, you've got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, by talking about, that you sort of hit that middle group, but then either end you were really losing people, I suppose one of the things that we've talked about in our professional learning experiences together is about the 3 selves and working towards students who are going to be self-motivated, self-directed, self-regulated. And do you think that was a piece, like thinking about
giving them any of
students
that.
in that way, was that maybe one of the triggers that made you think, might literature help students?
I think it was that, and also I was thinking about all the good books that I wasn't getting to do with the children because it didn't come on the list. So in my head I knew of these fantastic books that I had read or heard about, but you would pick it up and you would say, but I can't get it to connect with what the task is in the book this week.
Yes.
So I started to realise all this great stuff that I wasn't getting to read because I was restricting myself to whatever the program of the time was telling me I should be doing.
Yeah.
And I thought, so surely these kids aren't all going to like the same thing. I don't like the same as everyone else. So I started to think about how do I get all of them to come in at whatever point they need to come in at.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So changing from, so you were working really with a program approach.
Program approach, yeah.
Or like the rituals, the structures and
yes, like you get out the old,
of,
here's the format, here's with the box that you write your introduction in,
Yes.
the very,
Yeah.
Yes.
So you had pretty comfortably worked with that for 17 and a half years, but in the middle of a year,
Last year.
middle of last year, that went out the window.
Yes.
Talk to us about how you got to that point.
Well, I think, and I'm sure lots of people have felt the same way, I had been frustrated for a long time that I kept trying different ways to do this with what was available to me and what I had experienced. And it wasn't working, to be honest. It wasn't working. I mean, we were a school that had good NAPLAN results, but they were stagnant. They just flattened out. And something wasn't working, but I didn't know how to fix it until came to the first Be Brave and Lead session. And I must admit, it was something, the joy and the love and just the way you presented, that you just couldn't help but sort of be drawn in and sort of think, wow, there is something else. And it was that giving permission to, you know what, I don't have to do exactly what's written down for me in the curriculum, exactly what's written down in books. I don't have to do it that way. I think it was just realising that, seeing it from and a group of people that were there and everyone in the same position as me, all having that same light bulb moment. You could see them all going, oh, you know what?
You're still following
work.
the curriculum, but you're not doing it the way the program's
program.
Yeah, it's not
telling
programmed step by step
Yeah.
by step by step. Yeah. So you've just got the idea,
Yeah.
but you're free to work out a more open, appealing way to present it rather than a program that was set with this is how you do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you gave yourself permission to be the authentic teacher.
Yes.
Yeah. To make the decisions for you and for your children.
And give myself permission to be wrong and accept that. So to accept that what had happened in the past,
Wow.
I'd made some mistakes. Some things hadn't worked for whatever reason. And I think it was important that I said to myself, it happened.
Yeah. Yep.
Clear the board, start again fresh. I think that was important, that being able to acknowledge that it wasn't a failing or I just needed to recognise that I had an opportunity to change and that's what I needed to do.
Yes.
And it's only one part. Like there's lots of things you've done in the past that have been just great, but it's just saying that there's one aspect of my teaching that I couldn't do better.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that things had worked well, but you found sort of that scratchy point of what were you just doing that you'd always
done.
done,
Yes.
and what wasn't working that really made you think, okay, so all right, let me try this.
Yes.
So I'm just going to say that you were a very quick mover on this. Because I can remember you coming back to the next session with you had already made huge changes.
Yes.
And I think the first change was really about just bringing the literature.
I came
Wasn't
back,
it?
I'd picked a book that had been on display at one of your sessions. I'd picked The Tale of Despero.
That's right. Yes.
And I'd gone back to the kids and said, we're going to read The Tale of Despero. And I'd always fed to the kids, well, not fed, I'd always told the kids what was happening, on these Fridays. I'm going to a session with Sharon and she's helping me to work on ways to improve your writing and your reading. And they would say, what happened? What did you do? When I got back in the afternoon, they well, what's going on? And I said, we have this book. We're going to read this book.
Yes.
And I said, I haven't read it, so it's new to me. So, and that was a phrase that you had used about bless the book. Yes. So I had made a big deal about how excited I was. I hadn't read it before, that sort of thing. And so it started that same afternoon. I got the book and we started reading it straight away.
Fantastic.
That is, like I said, you're a quick mover, Alison.
But trying to hold myself back from those questions, when you read a chapter. Yep. So what do you think of this and what do you... So trying to just hold back and just let it flow from their point of view, what they wanted to talk about.
So you really put all of yourselves into the company of this author.
Yes.
And this story.
Yes.
So Kate Camillo, who's written The Tale of Despero and The Journey of Edward Tulane, Because of Winn-Dixie.
Winn-Dixie, yes.
A whole stack of wonderful, wonderful books. I actually follow Kate on Facebook and I just love the stories she tells about her own life, that I get to read, and you think, wow, access to that. But you really just allowed yourselves to be in the company of this author.
Reading for the joy of reading.
And this was your read aloud. And that was it. Nothing more, nothing less than now becoming a read aloud that let everyone do the thinking, and I'm guessing there's classroom talk that came up.
There was a lot of talk, which we hadn't had before.
I was going to say, what was the kids' reaction to the story and the book?
Well, because there was no preface, there was no purpose. So I didn't start the book saying we're reading this book because we're learning about or because we need to know about.
Yep.
Because I just read it, they would just talk about whatever came to mind. So they were interested in the French that was in the book because there's a little bit of French. So they wanted to know about the French, and they'd started to make connections to how, we did some of that when we were looking at the spelling of some of those words that come from France. And so they started to make connections, and then they started to connect with the imagery, and it was just all stuff that I wouldn't have thought to ask them about. Things like the difference between the rats and the mice and what they represent, and they just really, I didn't have a lot to say. I just sort of went along with it, and they sort of guided and had discussions amongst themselves. So sometimes I was really just an observer while they talked amongst themselves about what was going on, which hadn't happened previously. And kids that I wouldn't have expected or who in the past would not have engaged were engaging in the conversations.
Because anyone could.
Yes. Entry point for everybody.
Everyone could take part,
Yeah.
yes. Yep.
Yep. So what was next after that? Like after reading it out to them?
After reading it out to them, they asked a little bit more about other books that had been written by the author. And then we talked about how she had shown the feelings that the animals had. So what words, what language did she use that made us understand how Despero was feeling? And we started to talk about the language of feelings and that sort of stuff. And then we thought, well, let's do some writing around it. So we picked a particular moment in the book where poor Despero is being taken to the dungeon and having the little red line tied around his neck.
Yes.
And we did a thing where we talked about, well, let's write if we were Despero. So they all had a go at writing about if they were Despero standing there and their brother had betrayed them and their father had betrayed them and they had this rope around their neck, how would you feel? So we just undertook this writing task where they all just wrote at their own, and at given points we'd stop and share to help each other. Anyone want to share their ideas, they'd share how they started it. And one of the kids just happened to say, can we put this in a book? Let's put this in a book. So I said, all right, we'll make a book. So that was when we started to make our first book. So Despero was our first little booklet we made with each child's response in it.
Right, so a collection.
I love the way you're letting the kids guide what's
Yes.
a lot of what's happening here.
Yes.
You know, from the very start of what you were doing.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
And there is, just to make the connection, because one of the previous podcasts about the Every Child Every Day, there's Allington's and Rachel Gabriel's Every Child Every Day writes about something personally meaningful. And there was a personally meaningful response. If I was in this situation, this is what I would want to say. No formula.
no. And you didn't have those kids who would say, oh, I don't know what to write. I can't think of what to write. They just straight away,
Yeah.
because we've been reading about it, talking about it,
Yes.
and they all just found the point where they felt comfortable and they just
They
went
all,
with it.
they all had the background knowledge because
They all-
Yes.
because of the read aloud.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. They'd built to this point. It wasn't plucked out of nowhere.
That's right.
You know, what do you think of this situation when we've got no context to it? They were deeply invested.
Yes.
And so the read aloud really created discussion and writing unlike you'd had before.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So that was chapter 1 in my 3 chapters.
The importance of
about
a read aloud.
the importance of read aloud.
Yep.
So that's where it started, and already the writing changed. So after Despero, I think what came next?
There were 2. We had 2 going.
Yes.
We had Diary of Anne Frank that we had started to, because we were looking at War and Remembrance Day. We'd started Diary of Anne Frank, but we also started Mechanica as well. So we had 2 going at the same time with 2 completely different focuses.
Yes.
So Anne Frank was obviously quite heavy and quite a lot for them to take on. So having Mechanica gave them the other side of it, something completely different for them to concentrate on.
So now Mechanica is, so a lot of people will know the Diary of Anne Frank. And of course, it's in a diary format
Yes.
and historical. Well, I don't know that we can call it historical fiction.
No.
It's not fiction.
Actually, the kids asked me about this. What do we call this
How do we
book?
classify it?
Yes. Yes.
Is it
It's a diary.
diary that is autobiographical? I guess so. But the book Mechanica. Now, Mechanica, you could have 2 books on the go here because Mechanica is a very different...
Very different kind of book.
Yes. So for those people that don't know Mechanica, it's, it's a picture book, but with a lot of text.
There's a lot of text to it, yes.
Yeah.
Very
So-
technical text.
technical text. And there's actually a feature to Mechanica which I think is good for us to talk about for the listeners, in that so it's called Mechanica, a beginner's field guide. So we've actually got in this book a whole lot of creatures that are made of mechanical parts, but each creature, and we're looking into the future, but each of these creatures is written about in the same way.
Same format.
So whilst we say, oh, all right, there is a constant structure to how each creature is written about, that's also part of its strength and intrigue, is that we can take on the language and some structures and features from this, but this isn't a structure like any other.
No, it's not. No.
So if we talk about this as imaginative writing, the template doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
So this is the exciting thing about this, is that this book, as a read aloud, because it's made up of, I don't know how many creatures in the book, say it's 20, It is the same structure for
It
each
is,
of them.
yes.
And so in reading aloud this book, it becomes very quickly apparent how to, if we were going to write
Yes.
in this way, we can be highly successful at it because it's done over and over again in the book. So,
And it didn't require a lesson. They picked it up because they were hearing it time and time again. So they knew by the end of it
yep.
what the structure and features were of it.
Yes.
Yes.
And so the function of read aloud, of course, in using literature is that it's the students themselves. They're now getting to read like a writer. So chapter 2, reading like a writer. And through reading this book, like you've just said, it's wonderful, isn't it? No lesson. No lesson required.
Although we could call it a mini lesson, but it is not a lesson where you're teaching, but it is using a read aloud as the introduction, isn't it? So
Well, to letting the reader explore how does this work.
Yep.
So we're listening and thinking about, well, that's not the first intent, of course, is to, I have to listen to this like a writer. But for each one that's read,
It just naturally happens. So instead of me having to say, I'm going to read this and I want you to pay attention to, it just happened.
Yes, yeah. So how far in do you think you were into this before somebody said, oh, I'd like to do one of those?
The front cover.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah, they saw the front cover and they just looked and they said, wow.
Yeah.
What is this? And the first story, so when you read the story at the beginning of how Mechanica comes about, it just draws them in. It just drew them in because of the futuristic stuff and, animals being extinct, and it just really drew them in the way it talked. And a lot of the characters are young characters, similar to them. So reading those first few pages, it was like they were sold on it. They wanted to know more about what was going on.
Right. So the front page got them and they were in good company.
Yes.
In excellent company. Now, I'm just thinking, have we even said that you've got a Year 6 class? I'm not sure that
I think we did.
It was a Year 6 class I did this with.
Yes, you did this with.
Yes.
So I did just want to make the point too that whilst we're talking with Alison about what she did with Year 6s, these principles go across all year levels. This isn't particular to Year 6, but it's wonderful to hear of your journey with this, as we said, in just over 2 terms. So so you read all of Mechanica?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
And then what happened?
They got started on the project before I'd finished the book, so they went hand in hand. A couple of pages into it, they asked, because I'm very STEM motivated as well. I enjoy STEM. So the kids said it would be a really good STEM. It would be really good STEM if we could make a Mechanica. So I said, well, all right, we can make a Mechanica. We'll do that. So we set about looking at the author, looking at how Lance put together the book, how did he make the pictures, all of these sorts of things. And then the kids realised that we didn't have the similar computer programs and those sorts of things. But it didn't matter. They decided we could make them, make the real thing. Physically, let's make them. And same again, let's put them in a book.
Yes.
Because we already had one book. Let's make a book.
Yep.
And it just snowballed from there. So then it was, let's have a display, let's have our parents come in and see it, kids coming in saying, I bought Mechanica, parents talking about Mechanica. So it's sort of, this one really spread. And through the school as well, other classes were seeing my kids working on it, they were seeing what was going on. So it really fed through the school. So they really took ownership of Mechanica.
Oh, led it, and amazing. And I'm very privileged to have a copy of that book created by your class, because not only did every child, so we're not talking about making a class Mechanica, you had every child was wanting to make their own Mechanica.
Yes.
And so every child made their Mechanica and wrote using the same style as Lance, the author, has done. So yes, you've got a book bigger than the original.
And then on the completion of it, the children then rewrote the beginning of Mechanica because they wanted to put themselves and their Mechanica into the story of Mechanica. So then we had another book that went with it, Mechanica, the story continues. So it was where the children each wrote, if their Mechanica was in it, where it would fit
Oh, wow.
within the story. Yes.
So real purpose, real meaning for writing.
Yes.
So we've already, launched into chapter 3 of these stages where they've not only had it read aloud and being the writer, working out how all this works, they are being the writer with very little. So prior to the podcast, we sort of had this little bit of a discussion where you said, I can't even tell you, what lessons did I teach?
I can't. I can't. Previously, I could say, Monday, lesson 3, I did this. But when I got to the end of this and I looked back on it, I thought, I can't pick specific lessons where I taught specific things to do with this, and yet I still have this finished project.
Yes.
And I couldn't pin where certain things had happened, but obviously they had taken place, it had happened. But I think it was more student-directed. I was more there on the sidelines to guide and give support when it was needed, but it seemed to be more the students were pushing it in the direction they wanted it to go.
So some self-motivation,
Yes.
self-direction,
Yes.
self-regulation
Yes.
arrived without lessons to accompany that. So being in the company of the book, absolutely, reading like a writer, gave them... So the writing itself, when you look at the writing that they produced...
It's nothing like it was. It's just the difference is unbelievable, and parents have said the same, so we shared it with parents so parents could see what had come of it and the improvement, and it's just mind-blowing to think all that time of direct instruction and all that time I'd put into trying to get results and I wasn't getting them. And just this simple book has just
opened a door.
Vocab, spelling, punctuation, everything. It just all progressed. And I didn't feel myself having to give those direct instruction. And it was for all children.
Yes.
Regardless of their ability, they all in their own way had progressed in the time.
And teaching was more enjoyable?
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
It took a long time to think of that. I know how much he loved it. I was so excited every time. We would have another session and go, oh, what's Alison sharing this time? We were all motivated. We were all excited by it, really. Now, after Mechanica and Anne Frank, was there, or are we at the end of the year now?
Oh, no, we kept going. I must admit, and I said that to you, there was an abundance of reading and text that went on in those last 2 terms. I sort of said, this is the chance to experiment, to play around with it. So there was lots going on around books.
Yeah. I love that you've just used that word experiment and abundance, because the more abundant our experiences are with text, the more, if we're being given permission, the more we can experiment. And just to make a connection with the Australian curriculum, it talks about at each of the year levels that our students would engage in creating literary texts.
Yes.
No doubt there that they've done that. And creating imaginative, informative and persuasive texts.
Yes.
So I love how, talk to us a little bit about, so you didn't use any of those structures now.
No.
To talk about any of these things, and yet you got more imaginative, more informative, more literary than you'd ever. So, all right, so keep talking us through. So after Mechanica and Anne Frank.
Because we were going from Bless the Book,
Yes.
I talked about Gary Crew because I had always loved Gary Crew. I had read Strange Objects back when I was at university, and I had loved Gary Crew.
Yes.
And I'd read a lot of his books. And so the kids said, well, let's read one. So I got all of his books and put them all on display in the class for us all to have a look at, and we read The Water Tower.
Yeah.
And the kids picked up on, it doesn't finish. We don't know what happens. And they hadn't had a book like that before. It doesn't finish. We don't know. And they were very ill at ease with that. So they said, well, read Lucy's Bay. So I read Lucy's Bay. Well, that one's the same. It doesn't give us the answer. And they said, are they all like that? So we read 5 or 6 Gary Crew books, and they said, oh, he doesn't answer anything in these books. And I said, no, that's how it works. He doesn't give an answer. He leaves it for us to think about. And they took Water Tower away, and they weren't satisfied, and they looked at it, and they looked at it. And they said to me, can you put it up on the board in large so we can look at those pictures properly, because there's something in those pictures. And it took them forever. But in about a week later, they came and said, we've worked something out from these pictures. There's a symbol in these pictures, and this symbol appears in every picture. So they went through and they said what they thought had happened. So we left it at that, and then one of them found out there was a follow-up, and I didn't know there'd been a follow-up. And he came and he said to me, there's another book. There's another book. It will tell us what's going on. There's another book. Can we get it? So I ordered it. They were very excited when it came in. We read it, and then they went, he didn't answer it. It's worse now. It's more confusing. So it was really interesting to see that pain, that why hasn't it been answered, and having to explain to them, well, it's for you to think about and for you to, it was challenging their thinking, whereas they'd been used to, there's the answer in the book. So
yes, and that we'd probably, all of us in our lives have said, a story ends to be, to be a good writer, it will end with this satisfactory ending, with everything neatly tied up. That's one kind of ending.
That's right. And it was the same with the beginnings. They'd say, but narratives start with an introduction, a who, what, where, when.
Oh, right.
And it was that whole process they went through too. They started picking up, well, this one doesn't start with is it a narrative? And I had to start rethinking, well, you know what? We haven't. Using those structures, I've only ever focused on who, what, where, when.
Yeah.
But that's not what they're like. No. And actually, the more interesting the books, the less likely you are to see the who, what, where, when at the very start of the book. And they started to realise that.
So could it be that to really get into the richness of the Australian curriculum, that using literature helps us look at all structures?
Yes.
Because otherwise, if we're formula-driven, we'll just narrow in on these certain things. Whereas using literature in the way you've been using
it's much broader.
It makes you delve into the Australian curriculum, really, and the way they want
But
you
the
to.
children also own it. So rather than I've given it to you and you remember it, it's they've discovered it. They found it from looking at it. So they've got an ownership to it, which I think, from my experience, they hold on to it more. So when they, in the future, are writing or whatever they're doing next, they remember because they found it, they discovered it, they did the work to come across it. So it's more likely to stay on board with them than if I had given it to them in a lesson, a standalone lesson. They'll just forget it.
Self-direction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So critical.
Yep. And it's back to
And
that.
ownership.
And reading like a writer. Yes, you can see how that works. And I just love that you've really allowed your students, like you've just blown that apart. That all of what they knew about, stories always start this way was so limiting because that actually limits us as a reader as well. We're going to expect that a story is going to start this way. It doesn't, so that's confusing. Oh, no, that's not the confusing part. That's the getting us in, and that stories can start in so many ways, and it's knowing all those varieties of ways that it can start that then empowers us as thinkers and as writers and as learners.
And creates the multiple entry points that those children need.
Yes.
Those ones that need to start a different way or write a different way.
Yes, yeah. Oh, don't we all wish we were in Alison's class?
Well, I'm sold. I'm sold on literature to make writing happen in my classroom.
Well, I think there'd be some very convincing students who, if Alison hadn't convinced us, would be the ones that would absolutely sell it to us as well.
Yes.
Now, Alison, you've got the absolute pleasure of having this very group of students that you had for 2 terms at the end of last year. You start this year with them.
Yes, I do.
So what's this year going to hold?
well, we're going to hit the ground running, because I'm in the fortunate position that I don't have to do those getting to know you activities and those things that you do at the beginning of the year. So we can just pick up where we left off with our next read aloud. The library's there ready and waiting for them. They know how it all works. They know the library's up and running. They know how all of that works. In setting up my classroom now, I've set it up with the literacy in mind and the literature. So the way the class is set up is much different to how it was last year, to just work with using text and talking and discussion. So I think we're just going to get a lot more done because we can start straight away and get moving. So and the kids already know we're going to look at the outsiders as our book, so they know we're doing the outsiders. As soon as they come back, they know that's what we're starting with. I've got their writing portfolios from last year that I kept. I said we won't send them home, we'll keep them. I said because it's a chance for you to see from where we began to where you're going to finish at the end of year 7. You can see just how far you've come in your writing.
Oh, how rich is that? Yeah.
What does the portfolio look like, Alison? How do you?
We've made it a writer's portfolio, so it's just their writing, so they know it's their pieces of work, and they have elected that it's their final publication, so it's after it's been edited, and so it just has every sample of writing they do goes in there.
Yep.
And just with notes that I have put on there about their writing.
Yep.
And I think we've got about 8 samples in it from last year. So, they really want that. They like that. And that's put on display. They know it's on display, so any other student can look at it.
Right.
If parents come in and want to look at it, parents can come in and look at it. So it's also building that idea of we're all writers and we're sharing our work. So it's getting them used to, yes, they can read my work. It's not copying. If they pick up on something you've done, it's that they appreciate what you've done and they want to use that.
Yes.
So it's building that community of writers.
Yes. Yeah. Lovely. Maybe one thing we haven't talked about is, so in being writers, and you've already started talking about this, but it's that going through a writing process, that, of course, the process, starts with literature. That's what's kind of driving it. How do you have you found that you've needed to do particular lessons then around different aspects of the process, or have you found that all happening?
Not the full lesson. I guess Phil mentioned earlier the mini lessons. So there might be just that little, we have a discussion about something new.
Yes.
And then they'll go back and use it in their piece of writing that they're doing. But not the big, long 50-minute lesson. Here it is, you have a go. Yeah, so more of the mini lesson format.
So you might have an editing mini lesson that lets them get further.
The majority of the time is actually being real writers in the classroom, and that's actually how you improve in anything, isn't it? By doing more of that thing.
Yes.
But you just need those little mini times where you...
Yeah, so you just pick up on things, or the kids will ask about things that in that moment in time for what they're doing they want to know about. So that's what So I guess it's been a lot more, you have to be ready to sort of do things on the hop rather than have, in the past, you knew what was happening every day, what day was apostrophes, what day was commas. Instead, you have to be ready for when the kids have encountered it and want to know more about it, or how much they need to know about it.
Because you're actually matching their learning needs rather than your teaching prescribed needs. What about talking about their writing? Do you have times where they chat about writing to each other, or is that...
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. That's a tougher one to get them to share, because for some reason children have in their heads this idea of cheating, that concept of cheating, and if I talk about things, someone's going to take it from me. Yes. So that's taken a bit more work. So there's been a lot of structure getting around the idea of how authors share. So we've looked at how authors have similar styles, similar ideas, but it's their own work. So there's been a lot of time spent around that side of it. So we've started to progress in the discussing, and they're getting used to the discussions about their writing. And I think the trickiest part that we will work on this year is how to accept suggestions
And
criticisms, feedback. Yep. That's the next thing that they're not used to from their peers, to hear their peers say to them, you know, this is the issue, and take it as constructive rather than...
It's probably a year 6, 7 thing too, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's building on that. So it's getting them, so we've got the part where they're writing and they're enjoying the writing, so it's now building that ability to talk about it, discuss it, and be comfortable discussing it and sharing it.
Fantastic.
What wonderful...
I'm gobsmacked.
Yes. Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's...
Yeah.
You're stuck for words.
On a podcast.
Yeah, that's not good, Phil.
No.
No, but isn't this, like, this is such an exciting and rich story to be telling. You know, I'm just so happy.
Well, it's exciting to be a part of.
Yeah.
So for us now, reading now is more of a shared experience rather than it's a lesson we're doing around this book. It's, you know, so the kids know that the shared reading is only for me and them. So I told Sharon this story about I was at Be Brave and Lead and I had a TRT in my room and they picked up the book. It was Despero. They picked up Despero and continued to read it. My children objected and said, "You can't read that. Alison needs to be here because she hasn't read it either."
Oh.
And they went ahead and read it. And when I came back to class, I noticed that it was missing. It had swapped. And I said, "Who read Despero?" And in unison, "We told her not to read it." And I said, "Well, I'm going to have to read it again. I hope you don't mind if I go back and read it again because I don't know what's happened and I need to know what's happened." And they were all, "No, read it again. No, that's okay, read it again." So it was that ownership that it wasn't just a teaching tool.
Yes.
I was as vested in it as they were.
Yes.
I needed to know as much as they needed to know.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And you've really, you know, all of these things are really highlighting that community that you're building. That, you know, this is, you know, what we're doing, experiencing, learning together rather than, you know, we're all in this. Nobody's excluded.
No.
Not even the teacher.
Or the children with low-level reading ability.
Yes.
Quite often we miss what they can truly do because they're at a low level for the mechanics of reading. But when they do the read aloud, the way they engage, your eyes are really open to, wow, look at what they can actually do, look at how they can actually engage. Yeah. They probably don't get that chance with the books they're reading.
No.
They're not having that opportunity. And it takes the pressure off if I'm the one that's read it, but they can contribute to what they've understood from it. So it's made a big difference for those kids too.
Yes. And it's really giving our students, once again, I'm just sort of referencing the Australian curriculum and the progressions, and when we're talking about the different text types, that, you know, we're moving from, you know, simple to predictable to moderately complex to complex and then more complex. It's not the word, but more complexity.
Compound complex. There's all different.
Yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, you know, that we can bring more complex texts because that's what a good read aloud will do. It will be above our independent reading level, but not above our listening level. And that's sometimes what we don't acknowledge for our for those readers who we might see who are striving, who might not be achieving at the level that others in the class are. When do we really acknowledge what their listening level is?
That's right.
And their listening levels, like we can't, there's not even anything to measure that, but their listening levels are much higher. And so we must allow them to keep growing and thinking and engaging in that way where, you know, we're really missing a big chunk of the experiences that every child must have if we really aren't bringing those rich and complex read alouds to them.
Yeah.
So,
and Sharon, I'd like to make a connection with our timeless teas. I think it ticks off every one of the timeless teas, but in particular talking about true tasks where we are connecting reading with writing makes the experience much more meaningful, and the task, rather than being a program where you know, it's divorced from all their experiences and you teach these skills, but when you connect the literature with the writing, the reading and the writing together, then you make it a much more meaningful task for them.
Yes, yeah. Even right down to, I'll, go back to that example where, you said, Alison, with Despero, the writing that they did, that was writing about their reading, which was really meaningful, purposeful writing rather than answering what sometimes can be some pretty low-level questions that we can ask about things. Or we might be thinking we're asking some higher-level thinking questions, but unless we've really got our readers deeply invested in that text.
But we're also not finding out everything there is to know about the children.
No.
So with Lord of the Flies...
Oh, yes. Now, you've got a really
It was
good
quite bizarre
example
reading
here.
Lord of the Flies, and Lord of the Flies, they constantly refer to the children's clothes and how they slowly become more and more tattered. And I just said, I didn't know whether I'd get an answer or whether it would work, and I said, why is he talking about the clothes all the time? Why do we have to keep hearing about these clothes becoming more tattered? Why do we have to know this? And one of the children in my class, who doesn't often have anything to say, said, it's a metaphor.
Wow.
And I said, a metaphor? What's the metaphor then? And he said, it represents that they're becoming further and further detached from society, so they don't
Oh, my goodness.
need clothes. And I looked at him and I didn't know how to answer, and I went, wow.
Yeah. What if I'd not opened that door?
And all the other children then were,
Yeah.
Yep.
and then that prompted that discussion.
Yes.
They'd have never, and I would have never thought to talk about
No.
metaphors, but he just threw it out like it was nothing, and I would never have thought that he had that in him to just say,
Yeah.
it's a metaphor.
Yeah.
It's really casually.
Yeah.
And that he could then be the one to explain that.
He shared it, so he talked to the kids
So now
about
he's the teacher. He's the one
Yeah.
offering the learning in this situation. This is, and that's part of the community, isn't it? That we learn from each other as well as doing things together as a community. We are learning from each other, and we don't know.
No.
You're right. We do not know unless we open the doors.
Yes.
We don't know what, and even students themselves sometimes don't know what they have to offer. So if we're not asking the right kinds of questions, the big questions, or getting our students to be asking questions of themselves and of each others, of each other.
It's like sometimes we don't know what's going to happen in our podcast until we start talking, and all these amazing things come out. You know, it's the same thing, isn't it?
Every time.
Yeah.
Every time.
I think we'll wrap up now, and just been a wonderful session. Thank you so much, Alison, for your input, and what you're doing with your kids is amazing.
Yes,
Thank
we
you for having
love
me.
your work.
Oh, thank you.
And what a great year it's going to be.
It is, yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I'm very excited. Yes.
Yes.
But we're going to have some rapid fire questions now, which are things like
These kind of seem, after all those really interesting things from
Yeah, I
Alison, I'm thinking, is this kind of like just a letdown now?
Oh, well, it's
No,
kind of...
it won't be. No, because, oh my gosh, it's near the end of a podcast, isn't it? Alison's got great things to share. Let's keep going.
What was your favourite book as a child?
Charlotte's Web.
Oh,
Why?
I loved how the animals could talk. I
It is-
love
and it's beautifully
Jeffrey.
yes.
beautifully written, isn't
Look
it?
at that.
So rich.
Lovely. And I always remember the first line, where's Papa going with the axe? I've never forgotten that. Yes.
Yeah.
Who read it to you? Or did you read it for yourself?
We did it as a Year 3 novel in class.
Look at that.
Yes.
And you'll probably remember the teacher. It wasn't Mrs. Simpfendorfer. She
No,
was
it
here
was
too.
Mr. Day.
Mr. Day,
Yes,
if you're out
Mr.
there.
Day.
Yes. I'm like you. I can just about remember every book that every teacher read
Yes.
to me.
Yep.
And Charlotte's Web
Yes.
was definitely one
Yes.
that Miss Poole read to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's your most interesting school story, either current or when you were at school? Or
When I first started teaching in my first class, I had 10 reception children, brand new to school, in a disadvantaged area. And I had one who was a little bit difficult. And I had bent down to help another child at their desk with some work. And from behind, this lovely student had taken a roll of sticky tape. He had seen that I was bent over and he needed to put the tape somewhere. So he did and I ended up pushed across the table, laid out flat. Then being brand new to teaching, I'm thinking, now I've got to write a note to the office about why this child needs to be spoken to. And I remember thinking, how do I write down what he did with this roll of tape? And I still remember that, yes.
Yes. Only in a reception
Yes,
class.
yes.
Well, I sat down with the reception class and I said to them all, would you like to hear a story? And they all said, no. Anyway.
Yes.
For
reception or prep or foundation or first year of school, kindergarten for the listeners who aren't in South Australia.
How do you think you learned to read?
I had an auntie, a great auntie, who was a principal, and from the moment I guess I could have a book, myself and my siblings all had to learn to read, and she would come every Friday when she'd finished teaching to our house, and we would all take a turn at having to read to her, and we had to practice, and we would be practicing and we'd be nervous knowing she was coming. And I still remember Pam, Sam and Digger. Still remember them.
Yep.
But I say that, but we all got to school knowing how to read and knowing how to write. Whether it was the best way to do it, I don't know. But plus I had the bonus of Mum reading to me every night, read to all of us, constantly reading to us. That was the fun experience of reading. So we had readers with Auntie and we had the enjoyment of reading with Mum.
Maybe that's where the passion for literature came.
Yes, probably from Mum.
From Mum,
yes.
Yeah. So you really had the richness and the joy of reading, not just a school experience.
No, that's right.
Yes, with the reader.
The best question you love to ask teachers?
That's an interesting question, Phil.
Interesting question.
Wow.
Yes.
Why are you doing it that way?
Yeah, that's one.
I do ask that a lot. Why do you do it like that?
Yeah.
Very good reflective question, but also for getting insights.
Yes.
If someone asked that question of me when I was quite a while ago, and it was confronting. I thought, why am I doing it that way? Well, it was just
because that's the way you did it.
Yeah, I didn't know it. I didn't know another way. That's probably what it was. Yeah.
Anyway, back to Alison.
Best question you love to ask students?
What are you doing?
And what are you meant to be doing?
Yeah, and what are you meant to be doing?
True.
Yes.
How many times is that going to ask?
Or maybe it's now, why did you do it that way?
Yes, why did you do it that way? or at all.
Or is there another way you could do that?
Yes.
Yeah. Best tip for thriving in teaching literacy?
Not being afraid to have a go and to let things go when they don't work, and to not take it upon yourself as being some sort of failure, or you've just got to be willing to scrap what doesn't work and start fresh, and let the kids know that too.
Yep.
So I let the children know, I mucked that one up, let's get rid of that. Got that wrong, we won't do that, we'll start it, we'll do it differently.
Yeah, that's good.
And so would your gauge for it's not working be?
The children.
Yeah.
They let me know.
Yeah.
Especially in the upper years. They're not afraid to find the words to let you know when something's not working.
Yeah, they are very honest.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you for those insights, Alison. That's, as a profession, it's just so good for us to be able to get inside of other people's heads too, and because teaching can be very isolating.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of opportunities to do that.
No.
And we hope through this podcast it will reach teachers anywhere, in remote areas or wherever, where they can get some fantastic literature in their classrooms and start teaching in a different way.
Yes.
So, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And we've loved to see so many of you subscribing to our podcasts from all over. Please contact us through the Q Learning website, through Contact Us, or with any questions you have. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter via the Q Learning website, and you'll get advance notice of the blogs and podcasts. And subscribe to the podcast on your favourite platform. And now you can also join us on a Facebook group, the Teachers Toolkit Facebook group, so you can join in discussions all around literacy. But special thanks especially to our wonderful guest today, Alison. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fun. Thank you.
You might come back again. Yes.
Later in the year, and tell us how it's all going.
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't that be just? We'd love to, and I think people would love to know the books you're working with.
Well, not telling you your job would be lovely to hear from some kids too.
Oh, yes.
Do you know, that is exactly what we were thinking.
Yeah.
How good would that be?
A couple of kids.
Have some of your children talking about this. So yes, please. I think people would be thrilled to hear young writers talking about being a writer. And have the power of literature in that journey. So I agree.
Yeah, great idea.
We'd love to. We would love to. It's a deal.
Okay.
you just let your now it'll be
which one?
Yes, because they'll all want to.
They'll all want to.
Yes,
Yes.
and we'd all love. In fact, one of the things that I just want to add in, we'd love people to join us in the Facebook group for the Teachers Toolkit for Literacy, because after this podcast, we will also put up on Facebook a couple of things. One, I thought I'd add to the group just some of the books that you've mentioned today, so that people can just readily access those. And I thought it'd be just wonderful to be able to show a couple of photos from Mechanica, the book that you made. Be lovely to have. I think people would really love to see exactly what your writers and thinkers and stemmers created. So the Facebook group, in essence, though, is part of exactly what Alison was talking about, the value of being a community. The Facebook group is about us being a community, and I'm going to wind all of this up by going right back to Frank Smith, who says, we learn from the company we keep. And right now, thank you, Alison, we've learnt so much by being in your company of what literature can do and the art of using literature to teach writing.
Thank you.
So really thrilled to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye. All the best to everyone.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.